concubines who became empresses. For thousands of years, emperors of China had harems of dozens or even hundreds of wives. Emperors had the right to select concubines from among the teenage daughters of the nobility or peasantry. During the Ming dynasty, 5,000 beautiful women were brought from around the empire and lined up in front of the palace. They were narrowed down to just a handful who were admitted into the Forbidden City and had a chance of spending a night with the emperor. Inside the palace, imperial wives had an intricate system of hierarchy. At the top was the empress, who could have a good deal of political power. She was usually chosen for her nobility and connections. When the emperor died, she could claim the title Empress Dowager and continue her influence through her son. Below her were consorts, then concubines and maids. The emperor alone had sexual access to all of them, and they were closely guarded by eunuchs. If the emperor favored a particular concubine for her beauty, brains, or for bearing him a son, he had the right to promote her, even to the rank of empress. Today, let's meet 7 imperial concubines who, through allure, sex appeal, childbirth, cunning, and/or ruthlessness, managed to climb their way to power in Imperial China. A note on names. All of these women were given various new names as they climbed through the ranks of the harem. To keep things less confusing, I will refer to them by their imperial name throughout their lives. Empress Deng Sui was born in the year 81 CE in the Eastern Han Dynasty. When she was 15, she was lined up in front of the palace with hundreds of other girls. Deng stood above the competition, literally. At 5'5", she was 2 inches taller than the average man of the time. She became a concubine to 17-year-old Emperor Hu. Deng was elegant and graceful. She dressed modestly and eschewed makeup and jewelry. At banquets, she stood out from the other dolled-up ladies. Deng was a contrast to Empress Yan, who was short and clumsy. Deng tried to endear herself to the empress by acting humbly and covering up for the empress's mistakes. But this only infuriated Yan. The emperor had lost several sons to childhood mortality, and Deng encouraged him to sleep with more concubines and sire more sons. This further enraged Yan, who didn't want competition for her own children if she managed to have any. The emperor fell ill, and Yan told Deng that if he died, she would have Deng's family slaughtered. Terrified, Deng was on the brink of ending her own life. But her maid stopped her in the nick of time by informing her that the emperor had recovered. Empress Yan was found guilty of witchcraft and deposed. She soon died of sorrow. Deng was appointed the new empress. She continued to be diligent and humble and resisted the emperor's offer to promote her relatives. She also refused the financial tributes empresses customarily received. Instead, she asked for gifts of ink and paper. She was a student of one of the world's first female historians, Ban Zhou, whom she appointed a lady-in-waiting. There is no record of Empress Deng bearing any children, but as empress, she could claim any sons born to her husband's concubines. The emperor had 2 young sons left, who were both in poor health. Emperor Hu died at 26, and Deng became Empress Dowager. She made the younger but healthier of her 2 stepsons, Emperor Shang. He died within a year. Deng feared that the older brother would resent her for not making him emperor first, so she instead appointed his 12-year-old cousin, Emperor An. Deng ran China as regent. She made a number of well-received reforms, including cutting taxes, extending appeals for the death penalty, and reducing palace expenses. She did not tolerate corruption, cut out spending on luxuries, and let go of superfluous staff. She faced 2 years of repeated floods, droughts, and hail, but was effective in organizing relief. As Emperor An came of age, advisors expected the humble Empress Dowager to step down, but instead she angrily gripped onto power for a few more years. Empress Dowager Dong died at 40 and was buried with full honors. Emperor An's wet nurse and trusted eunuch were resentful of having been made to wait so long to have power. so they forced Deng's relatives out of the government and, as was common at the time, invited them to end their own lives, which was seen as a more honorable alternative to execution. So in the end, Deng did bring about her family's destruction. Empress Liang Na was born in 106 in the Eastern Han Dynasty into a noble family. She studied needlework, history, and the Confucian classics. When she was just 12, she was selected as a concubine for Emperor Shun. Shun favored Liao, but she would often decline invitations to his bedchamber, replying that he needed to spread his attention more equitably among his many concubines. The emperor was impressed with her virtue, so he named her Empress. She did not bear any children, but she claimed the only son delivered of a concubine. When the emperor died of illness at 29, Liang became Empress Dowager for her 2-year-old adopted son. She was a fair ruler, but she relied on her brother Gi, who was corrupt and stamped out dissidents with violence. Within a year, Emperor Zhong died. The empress called several princes to the palace to be examined as potential new emperors. She favored an adult prince, but her brother pressured her to select 7-year-old Cixi as he could be easily controlled. The new emperor soon realized that Gi was pulling everyone's strings. He publicly called him out, so Gi had him poisoned. Next, he persuaded his sister to name 14-year-old Hong emperor. They married him to their own younger sister, Nu Ying. The new emperor despised his empress, who spent more money than any previous consort. But out of fear of ending up like his predecessor, he said nothing against her, though he rarely slept with her. Nu Ying therefore had no children and grew jealous of her husband's concubines. If she learned that any of them were pregnant, she ordered them murdered. When Emperor Hong turned 18, Empress Dowager Liang Na peacefully stepped down as regent and handed power to him. She died later that year of illness at 34 and was buried with great reverence next to her husband. But her brother and sister became all the more greedy and power-hungry. The emperor plotted with eunuchs to overthrow them, and for good measure, he slaughtered every member of their clan. Though Empress Dowager Liang Na had been honorable, her grasping relatives meant that she was demoted in death. Empress was struck off her tomb. Empress Dowager Hu was born in the late 400s in northern Wei into a noble family. Her aunt was a famous Buddhist nun who preached in the imperial palace. She told Emperor Shenwu about her niece's remarkable beauty, and he called for her to become a concubine. Hu was literate, well-versed in Buddhism, and capable of making quick decisions. For 100 years, there had been a tradition that when an emperor's son was named crown prince, his mother was put to death. This prevented an emperor's maternal family from becoming too powerful, but it also meant that the terrified concubines were either taking toxic concoctions to induce abortions or smothering their newborn sons in their cradles. When Hu became pregnant, her friends encouraged her to end her pregnancy. But she was willing to sacrifice herself to give the empire a crown prince. She delivered a bouncing baby boy. To protect his only son, the emperor took him away from Hu and gave him to a wet nurse. He named him crown prince and rewarded Hu for her bravery and loyalty by striking down the matricide rule and allowing her to live. 5 years later, the emperor died suddenly, and Hu's young son was named Emperor Ming. Hu became Empress Dowager and regent. She was an intelligent and capable leader and built a number of Buddhist temples. She was highly respected at first, but she was lenient on corruption. When a governor killed several peasants without reason, she only reassigned him. She took as her lover her late husband's brother. Her extravagant rewards to her favorite officials drained the imperial coffers and put a heavy burden on the people. Next, she ordered that every province build a tower to the Buddha. The young emperor was convinced by his mother's brother-in-law, Prince Yan Cha, that his mother was plotting to poison him. So he ordered his mother's arrest and her lover's execution. Now in power as regent, Yuan Cha was even more corrupt than Hu had been. He cared little for governing and spent his time feasting, drinking, and taking concubines. Hu decided to try a different tact. She proved herself loyal to Yuan Cha and offered to take some of that pesky governing off his hands. He was all too eager to free up more time for partying, so he handed her a number of duties, including command of the Imperial Guard. Hu promptly ordered the guards to arrest the prince and force him to kill himself. Back in power, Hu lived more decadently than ever. This led to rebellion and territories were lost to Liang, the empire to the south. When her ministers informed her of these losses, the Empress Dowager flew into violent rages. So they stopped telling her and she lost all sense of what was going on outside the palace. Emperor Ming, now 18, began plotting to take control from his mother, so she poisoned him. It seems she wasn't willing to sacrifice her life for his after all. Ming had fathered only one child, and Hu initially passed the baby off as the next emperor, until it was revealed to be a daughter. Next, she placed another relative of her late son, 2-year-old Yan Shao, on the throne. An adult cousin, Yuan Zhou, led a rebellion against the empress. When Hu was informed of the army's approach, she ran to a convent. But piety didn't save her. When Yuan Zhou took over the country, he ordered Empress Dowager Hu to be thrown into the Yellow River and drowned. Her sister fished her corpse out of the water and buried her in one of the temples she had erected. Empress Wu Zetian was born in 624 in the Tang dynasty. Her father was a timber baron and her mother came from a powerful noble family. Her father appreciated her intelligence and encouraged her education. When Wu was 13, she was offered a position as one of the lesser concubines to 39-year-old Emperor Taizong. With hundreds of women around, the emperor didn't notice Wu, but she became a court secretary. She did have a passionate affair with the emperor's son. The relationship was considered incestuous and highly scandalous. When Wu was 25, the old emperor died, and all of his widows were sent to a monastery, where their heads were shaved and they were forced to become nuns. But her former lover, Emperor Gaozu, invited her back to court to be one of his concubines. Wu soon gained favor and frequent nocturnal visits with the emperor. She was promoted to second only to the empress. Wu gave birth to a son and a daughter. The empress didn't have any children and grew jealous. When Wu's daughter was found dead in her cradle, she accused the empress of using witchcraft to murder her baby. The empress was arrested, had her hands and feet cut off, and was drowned in a vat of wine. For centuries after, Wu was vilified by claims that she killed her own child in order to frame the empress. However, modern historians believe the baby's death was likely the result of sudden infant death syndrome or carbon monoxide poisoning. Either way, Wu was promoted to empress and dominated the emperor's attention. She gave birth to 6 children, almost unheard of for a single imperial consort. As her husband became increasingly ill with chronic disease, he depended on Wu to govern. At first, she hid behind a pearl screen during council meetings, but as the emperor found it harder to get out of bed, she held the meetings herself. For 23 years, she was the real power in China. According to chroniclers since, Empress Wu was ruthless against those who opposed her. She had her enemies arrested, exiled, or forced to end their own lives. She granted royal positions to her relatives, but was just as ruthless against them. Her niece became pregnant by the emperor, so Wu had her poisoned. 2 of her own sons spoke out against her, and she had one poisoned and the other banished, and ordered her daughter-in-law to be starved to death. Emperor Gaozong died at the age of 55. Wu's 3rd son became Emperor Zhongsong, but Wu was not about to hand over power. She served as regent for the 28-year-old emperor. He lasted 6 weeks, but as soon as he began to cross his mother, she had him deposed and banished. The youngest son became Emperor Ruizong, but he was not allowed to meet with court officials or make any rulings. A rebellion broke out against the empress, but she crushed it, executed the courtiers involved, and introduced a police state. Courtiers were encouraged to spy on each other, and many were tortured and executed. Wu gave up the pretense of ruling through her son and declared herself the first and only female emperor in China's history. She was opposed by many male chief ministers, so she posted a woman to the role. Wu took a Buddhist monk as a lover. He surrounded himself with a squad of thuggish eunuchs who assaulted the couple's enemies. Despite the alleged bloodshed, she was a favorable ruler to her people. She allowed commoners and women to serve in the government, ended years of famine by building granaries, and defended China against invasion. Her rule was a time of unprecedented freedom for women. She promoted Buddhism and was one of the first rulers to endorse printing. Wu built many grand temples, including the giant Wild Goose Pagoda, which may have been the tallest building in the world at the time. 2 of her temples were burned down by her jealous lover. As punishment, she put him in charge of rebuilding the pagodas. Then she had him beaten to death, cremated, and had his ashes mixed into the mud, which was used to complete the temples. Wu kept her youngest son around as heir, but kept him in line by executing his wife. Now in her 70s, the empress took 2 brothers as lovers and bodyguards. They grasped at power until they were murdered by Wu's 2 surviving sons. The eldest son seized the throne from his mother and became Emperor Zhongsong yet again. The former empress was kept under guard until she died at the age of 81. Monuments throughout the Valley of the Kings tell of the many great deeds of the emperors, but Wu Zetian's monument was left blank in an effort to erase her from history. Recent historians have been re-evaluating Wu's legacy. If she really did all the ruthless things the chroniclers claim, she was no worse than many of the emperors who came before or after her, yet she has been uniquely demonized. The positive things she did for China, and the mere fact that a woman was able to hold power for 38 years and hold the throne for 15 is exceptional. Empress Wu is the subject of a 2014 drama series, The Empress of China. Empress Liu was born in 968 during the Song dynasty. She was a peasant and was orphaned in infancy and raised by relatives. She was sent out to make money as a singer and hand drum player. She married a silversmith who took her to the capital, ran out of money, and sold her to a palace official. There, the 14-year-old entertainer caught the eye of 15-year-old Prince Jinsong. He became infatuated with the crude country girl and began neglecting his duties and forgetting to eat. The emperor could not stand for this and ordered his son's paramour banished from the palace. The prince gave 500 ounces of silver to the man who owned Liu so that he could build her own residence near the palace. Jinsong became emperor at 28. He hadn't forgotten his childhood love, and he brought Liu back to the palace and made her a concubine. When his empress died, he wanted to name Liu Empress, but his advisors warned against it because of her low birth. Liu was now 40 and childless. She encouraged Jinsong to sleep with her maids, and when one of them gave birth to a son, she claimed the baby as her own. Now that she had secured the succession, Liu was promoted to empress. She was perceptive, had good judgment, and a quick wit. The emperor discussed matters of state with her and trusted her advice. When he fell ill, she took over many political tasks. The emperor died at 53, and Liu was appointed regent to her 12-year-old adopted son, Emperor Renzong. The former concubine now wielded the most power held by a woman since Wu Zetian, and she was the second woman in history to wear the imperial robe. She issued edicts in her own name, attended imperial festivals and ancestral worship, and had her birthday celebrated as though she was an emperor. She didn't bother to sit behind a pearl screen, but held court in the open with or without the child emperor enthroned next to her. She was a wise ruler and delegated well. She promoted based on ability, not nobility. When Emperor Rensong turned 17, Liu refused to give up power. She remained regent for another 6 years until her own death at 63. The emperor had believed that Liu was his biological mother. When he learned the truth after her death, he posthumously demoted her and elevated his long-dead biological mother to Empress Dowager instead. Empress Liu is the subject of 2 recent popular drama series, Palace of Devotion and A Dream of Splendor. Empress Gi was born in 1315 in the kingdom of Goryeo, modern-day Korea. Her father was a bureaucrat. She was selected as one of the beautiful teenage girls the king of Goryeo sent as tribute to Emperor Hosong of the Yuan dynasty every 3 years. She was attractive, graceful, and skilled at dancing, conversation, singing, poetry, and calligraphy. Soon the emperor spent more time with her than with his empress. The empress's brother rebelled, and the whole family was put to death. The emperor wanted to promote Gi to empress, but only concubines of the Mongol clan were permitted this honor. However, when Gi gave birth to a son, the emperor promoted her to second empress and named their child his heir. The emperor lost interest in ruling and came to rely on Gi. She was particularly interested in her homeland and named her brother overseer of Goryeo and plotted with him to take over the country. Their plan failed, and the king of Goryeo ordered Gi's entire family to be executed. The empress sent the Mongol army against her homeland. The Mongols were defeated, and Gi is still seen as a traitor in Korea. She was more popular in China, where she distributed porridge during a famine and paid for burials during a plague. The empress died, and she was finally promoted to first empress. She enjoyed her position for only 3 years. The Yuan dynasty was attacked by Han Chinese rebels, who seized power and established the Ming dynasty. The Mongol royal family fled to modern-day Mongolia. Little is known of Empress Gi's final years. Empress Dowager Cixi was born in 1835 during the Qing dynasty. Her father was a mid-level government official and part of the Manchu ethnic minority who ruled over majority Han China. Cixi was thus exempt from the painful ritual of foot binding. At 16, she was one of 60 girls lined up in front of the palace for the new 21-year-old Emperor Xinfeng. Cixi was noted for her captivating eyes. They gained her entry into the Forbidden City. She was literate and became a secretary to the emperor. Once, she dared to suggest ways the army might overcome the Taipei Rebellion. The emperor was furious and ordered her arrest. But Empress Tian stepped in and convinced Xinfeng to forgive her. The 2 women thus became lifelong friends. When Cixi was 19, she gave birth to the emperor's first son. As he grew and remained the only surviving son, she was elevated through the ranks of consorts until she was second only to the empress. In 1860, during the Second Opium War, the British burned down the Summer Palace. Xianfeng, who was 30 and already suffering dementia, turned to drink. On his deathbed, he named a regency council of 8 to rule for his 5-year-old son, and both Empress Tian and Cixi as Empress Dowagers. The regents and the empresses soon began to struggle for power. During a council meeting, Cixi intentionally provoked the regents into shouting at her. This caused the young emperor to burst into tears. Cixi then accused the regents of disrespecting the emperor, which was tantamount to treason. She had them arrested, beheaded 3, and banished the others. Thus, she became the regent and ruler of China. She had to conduct her reign behind a pearl screen and was prohibited from appearing in front of the palace. Still, she made seismic changes to the empire. She pivoted the government from being adversarial towards the West to making alliances. She asked the British to help modernize the Chinese army. Thus, they were able to end the deadly Taipei Rebellion, which had been raging for 14 years. Trade with Europe was opened up, Western schools established, and British and French officials were hired to oversee agricultural, industrial, postal, and coinage reform. Telegraph lines were strung, but the empress resisted train tracks, fearing the noise would disrupt ancestral shrines. Cixi Emperor died of smallpox at 20. His empress was pregnant, but her family ordered her to starve herself to death in a show of piety, which may have been encouraged by Cixi. The empress's dowager chose 3-year-old Gangju Emperor. He was instructed to address Qian as Empress Mother and Cixi as Blessed Father. Empress Qian died suddenly at 43. Some thought Cixi had her poisoned, but she seems to have been devastated by the loss of her lifelong friend. Cixi lost enthusiasm for governing, handed power to Emperor Gansu, and retired to the luxurious new summer palace. The new emperor was insecure and went to Cixi almost daily for advice. Soon his advisors began going directly to her, cutting out the emperor entirely. In 1895, China faced a blistering defeat in the First Sino-Japanese War. Humiliated, the emperor launched an intensive 100 days reform. Cixi was against this and launched a coup. The emperor was imprisoned on a luxurious island, and Cixi was once again in control. Next, the anti-foreign Boxer Rebellion broke out. Thousands of Europeans and Chinese who had picked up Western habits were murdered. The 8-nation alliance of the UK, the US, Russia, Japan, France, Germany, Italy, and Austria-Hungary invaded China to protect their citizens. Cixi sided with the rebels and lost. China was saddled with a humiliating treaty and a massive war debt. Cixi personally took the blame for the war. She tried to make amends with taking new reforms even further. The government, tax, and education were upended. Foot binding was banned, and marriage between Manchu and Han Chinese was legalized. Cixi intended to make China a constitutional monarchy, complete with elections. But before she could implement this most radical change, Emperor Gansu died of arsenic poisoning as part of a vast conspiracy. Days later, Cixi herself was on her deathbed, also suffering the effects of arsenic. She named as her heir 2-year-old Puyi. The Empress Dowager who had ruled China for 47 years died at the age of 72. Puyi would become known as the last emperor of China. He was deposed in 1912, ending 2,000 years of imperial rule. In 1928, Cinci's luxurious tomb was ransacked. Jewels were stolen from her corpse, including a giant pearl which had been placed in her mouth to prevent decay. Empress Dowager Cixi, like many other concubines who became empresses, was vilified for decades after her death and blamed for the ills of the empire. But in more recent years, her legacy has been reevaluated as a woman who rose to power against incredible odds and did her best to lead China through interesting times. Want even more tea on history? Check out the History Tea Time podcast. You can now follow History Tea Time on Facebook, Instagram, and TikTok. A special thank you goes to my patrons, Corin Nicholson and Jordan. If you enjoyed this video, please like, subscribe, comment your thoughts, and check out my other royal history videos. If you really want to help, please consider supporting me on Patreon. A link is in the description. Thank you for watching.